My name is Eileen Mercer, and I was 59 years old when my brother called me greedy for asking what happened to my inheritance. Not demanding, not threatening, just asking. That was all it took for Wade to look across my mother's kitchen table, fold his hands like a disappointed pastor, and say, "I thought you were better than this, Eileen." I had been better than this for 7 years. I had been better than this when Mama's left leg stopped working right after her second stroke, and Wade said he wished he could help, but he had quarterly deadlines. I had been better than this when I used my school secretary pension to catch up the electric bill, because Mama had hidden the shutoff notice under a stack of grocery coupons. I had been better than this when I slept in a recliner beside her bed with one ear open for the oxygen machine and the other trained on the hallway, because she had started trying to walk to the bathroom alone at 2 in the morning. Wade had been better dressed. That was his contribution. He came to the funeral in a charcoal suit, kissed every aunt on the cheek, stood at the casket with his hand on Mama's shoulder like he had carried her there himself, and told people, "We are going to honor her wishes." People believed him because Wade had always sounded like a man who knew where paperwork lived. He had a leather folder, a banker's haircut, and a wife named Pamela, who wore pearls to breakfast and called every mean little sentence just impractical. 2 weeks after Mama's funeral, I drove to the house on Sycamore Road to water the porch ferns. They were half brown already because grief makes you forget small living things. I turned the corner past the Baptist church, saw the yellow siding through the maple trees, and for one soft second, I felt the old habit return. I almost reached for my phone to call Mama and tell her I was 5 minutes away. Then I saw the sign, "For sale." Not just for sale. A red rider hung beneath it, zip-tied so tight it bowed at the edges. Sale. Pending. There were 2 men in clean jeans standing by the front windows with a tape measure stretched across the sill. One of them had his phone out, taking pictures of the porch. I parked crooked at the curb and got out without shutting the car door. I asked, "Can I help you?" The younger man smiled the way strangers smile when they think a woman my age is confused. He said, "We are just getting measurements for the buyers." I asked, "The buyers of what?" He looked at the house, then back at me and said, "This property." I still had Mama's house key in my hand, the brass one with the little red plastic cap she used so she could tell it from the garage key. I held it so tightly, the teeth pressed into my palm. I said, "No. There are no buyers." The older man's smile slipped, and he said, "Ma'am, we were told the contract is accepted." By whom, I wanted to ask, but I already knew. Wade answered on the 4th ring, irritated before he said hello. I asked, "Why are there men measuring Mama's windows?" He exhaled through his nose and said, "Eileen, do not start." I asked, "That house is under contract?" He said, "It is being handled." I asked, "Handled by who?" He said, "By the person willing to make decisions instead of drowning everything in emotions." I looked at the sale pending sign until the red letters blurred at the edges. I said, "Wade, we have not had an estate meeting. I have not seen the will. I have not signed anything. You cannot sell Mama's house without telling me." That was when he used the word. He said, "Do not act greedy now." The older man by the window dropped one end of the tape measure. It snapped back against the aluminum frame, and I turned away so those strangers would not see my face. Wade kept talking. "Pamela and I knew this would happen. You always thought taking care of Mama meant you were buying the house one doctor visit at a time. For 7 years, I had swallowed my resentment in small pieces. I had learned to let Wade be wrong because correcting him cost more energy than I had. I had let Pamela say, "You are so lucky you have time," as if retirement meant I had been handed a blank life for everyone else to fill. But standing in Mama's yard with a sale, pending sign in the grass, I understood something clean and ugly. They had not forgotten me. They had planned around me. The house on Sycamore Road was not grand. It was a one-story ranch with yellow siding, Wade always called dated, and Mama called sunny. The roof line sagged just a little over the back porch. The driveway had a crack shaped like a river. The lilacs along the kitchen window leaned hard to the left because my father had planted them, too close to the fence in 1968 and refused to admit it. But that house held the shape of my whole adult life. I learned to bake biscuits in that kitchen, standing on a step stool while Mama cut shortening into flour with 2 butter knives. I brought my first paycheck there and laid it on the table because Daddy wanted to see my name, printed on something official. I came home to that house after my divorce with 2 suitcases, a bruised pride, and a son who was old enough to know not to ask too many questions. Later, when my son moved to Oregon and Mama's health started slipping, the house became less memory and more work. Real work. The kind people praise from a distance because they have no intention of helping. The medicine chart was taped inside the pantry door. Morning pills in the blue cup. Evening pills in the white cup. The blood pressure cuff lived in the drawer with the dish towels. The walker had tennis balls on the back legs because Mama hated the scraping sound. The fridge was full of labeled containers because she would forget whether Wednesday's soup was still good. Then she would call me at school before I retired, whispering like she was ashamed. I became the daughter who knew which pharmacy tech was patient and which one snapped. I knew how to talk Mama through a shower without making her feel like a child. I knew which hymns calmed her when she woke from a nap thinking Daddy was still alive and late for supper. Wade knew the best route to avoid traffic on Christmas Eve. That was the difference. He would come twice a year with a bakery pie and a bottle of red wine Mama could not drink because of her medication. He would pat the arm of her recliner and say, "You hanging in there, Mom?" Then he would open the mail on the kitchen counter like he was auditing a company he owned. "Why is the gas bill this high?" I would say, "Because she is cold all the time." He would ask, "Why did you pay this plumber so much?" I would say, "Because the toilet backed up into the hall." Then he would say, "You need to watch these things, Eileen." I watched everything. That was the problem. I watched so much that I saw what everyone else preferred not to. I saw Mama flinch when Wade made jokes about putting her in one of those nice places. I saw Pamela glance around the living room like she was mentally pricing the furniture. I saw how every conversation about care became a conversation about money. And every conversation about money ended with Wade implying I was not smart enough to understand it. 3 years before Mama died, the roof began leaking over the hallway closet. At first it was a brown stain, no bigger than a saucer. Then a spring storm came through, and water ran down the wall behind Daddy's old winter coats. I called Wade 3 times. He texted back, "Get estimates and we will discuss." Discuss meant delay. The cheapest estimate was still more than Mama had in checking. She was embarrassed. I found her at the kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of her, one hand over her mouth, staring at numbers she could not make smaller. I said, "I can cover it." She said, "No." I said, "Mama." She said, "No, Eileen. I am not taking your retirement money." I told her, "You are not taking it. I am keeping the house dry." She cried then, quietly and angrily, because she had spent her whole life paying bills before they turned mean. I paid the roofer with money I had saved for a trip to Maine I never took. Wade said he would circle back, and he never did. 2 months later, Mama asked Denise, my cousin, to come over after church. Denise had worked at the courthouse before she married a highway patrolman, and Mama trusted her around forms. I remember the three of us at the kitchen table. Mama wore her blue cardigan even though it was June. She had her good pen out, the silver one Daddy gave her for their 30th anniversary. Mama said, "I want this written down right." I thought she meant a repayment note for the roof, but she said, "No, I want Eileen protected." I argued. I told her not to do anything dramatic. I told her Wade would be hurt. Mama looked at me with that tired, sharp look mothers get when they have watched a child lie to herself for too long. She said, "Wade will survive being hurt. You might not survive being erased." I should have listened harder. A few weeks later, Mama told me the paperwork was filed. I was busy that month with her cataract surgery, and the washing machine dying, and the new neighbor's dog barking every night. I did not ask enough questions. She said, "Half the house is yours now, and my half will be handled later." I hugged her. I put the folder she gave me in the bottom drawer of the china cabinet, under old appliance manuals, because that was where Mama kept important things she did not want Wade reviewing. Then life kept coming. Pills, appointments, falls, insurance calls, nights with wet sheets, and mornings with weak coffee. By the time Mama died, I had almost forgotten the exact words on that paper. Wade had not, or maybe he had counted on me forgetting. After I saw the sale pending sign, I went inside the house while the measurement men backed away to their truck. They were not bad men. They had walked into somebody else's lie-wearing work boots. The air inside smelled stale, like closed curtains and old lavender spray. Mama's recliner still faced the television. Her crocheted blanket lay over the arm, folded badly because I had done it after the hospice nurse left for the last time. On the kitchen table sat a stack of glossy brochures from Fern and Field Realty. Someone had arranged them in a neat fan, like the house was already a product and not the place where my mother had taken her last breath. I picked one up. It said, "Charming estate property. Motivated seller. Quick close preferred. Motivated seller." I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. The motivated seller was dead. Her daughter was standing in the kitchen holding a brochure she had not approved, and her son was telling people I was greedy. I opened the china cabinet drawer. Appliance manuals, expired warranties, a yellow envelope full of old batteries. No blue folder. I checked again, then again. The folder was gone. That was when my hands started shaking. Not from sadness. From the clean shock of realizing Wade had been inside the house before me, removing things. I called him again. This time Pamela answered from his phone. She said, "Eileen, he is in the middle of something." I said, "He took the folder from the china cabinet." She paused for half a second. Pamela was good at pauses. She used them like jewelry, little decorations that made her sound reasonable. She said, "I do not know what you are talking about." I said, "Yes, you do." She said, "Wade said, you might get worked up and start looking for things that do not concern you." I looked out the kitchen window at Mama's lilacs. A bee moved clumsily through one of the purple clusters. I said, "Documents concerning my mother's house concern me." Pamela gave a soft sigh. This is exactly what we were afraid of. I asked. We? She said. The family. People are grieving, Eileen. This is not the time to grab at assets. That sentence did something to me. It did not break me. It hardened a seam. I said, I paid the roof. I paid the back taxes in 2021 when Wade said he was between bonuses. I paid for the hospital bed rental for 4 months before Medicare reimbursed part of it. Do not talk to me about grabbing. Pamela's voice cooled. Caregiving does not make you an owner. I said, no. Paper does. She went quiet then. Not long, just long enough. Then she said, you should be careful accusing people of things. I said, I am. Then I hung up before anger could make me sloppy. That evening, the family group chat bloomed like mold. Pamela wrote first, Wade and I are trying to settle things peacefully, but Eileen is making the house sale difficult. My cousin Marla answered with a sad face emoji. Then Aunt Ruth wrote, your mama would not want fighting. Wade added, I am not going to discuss private estate matters in a group text, but I will say I am disappointed. I stared at the screen in my dark living room. The television was on mute. My dinner, toast with peanut butter, sat untouched on a plate balanced on the arm of my chair. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, tell them how many nights you slept through while I cleaned Mama after accidents. Then I deleted it. I typed, tell them how you took Daddy's tools before the funeral potatoes were cold. Then I deleted it. I typed, show them the folder you stole. Then I deleted that, too. Anger gives people screenshots. Proof gives them nowhere to hide. So I put the phone face down and made a list. County recorder, tax office, title company, realtor, Denise. The next morning, I drove to the county records office in the same navy cardigan I used to wear behind the school. Front desk, when angry parents came in demanding to see the principal. That cardigan had survived coffee spills, copier toner, and one 8th grade boy throwing up within 3 feet of me. It made me feel official enough to keep my voice steady. The county building sat between the courthouse and the old library, all brick and bad fluorescent lighting. I had been there before for license plates and voter registration, but never with my mother's address folded in my purse like a confession. The woman at the property records counter wore purple reading glasses on a chain. Her nameplate said, Hanley. She asked, how can I help you? I said, I need the current deed for a property. She slid a form toward me and asked, address? I wrote 114 Sycamore Road. My hand looked older than I expected. Mrs. Hanley typed for a while. The keyboard made quick little clicks. She frowned once, not dramatically, just enough to make me study her face. She asked, do you want the current deed only, or the transfer history? I said, both, please. She nodded and turned to the printer behind her. I stood there listening to paper feed through a machine, and I thought about Mama's silver pen. I thought about her saying, you might not survive being erased. I thought about how many women are erased politely, not with shouting, but with folders removed from drawers. They are erased with relatives saying, we are handling it, and with wives like Pamela telling a family that concern looks a lot like control if you dress it properly. Mrs. Hanley came back with a small stack. She said, the most recent recorded deed is from 3 years ago. This one transferred an undivided 1/2 interest from Margaret Mercer to Eileen Mercer. Margaret retained 1/2 interest. My name was right there. Eileen Ruth Mercer. Black letters, white paper. recording stamp in the corner. Book number, page number, date, county seal. I did not cry. I traced the edge of the paper with one finger and felt the roughness where the toner sat. I asked, "It was recorded?" She said, "Yes, ma'am." I asked, "So it is not just something she signed at home?" She said, "No, ma'am. This is recorded in the county property records." I had to swallow before the next question. I asked, "Could someone sell this house without me?" Mrs. Hanley's expression changed into the careful neutrality of a woman who has seen families do ugly things over land. She said, "I cannot give legal advice, but the current deed of record shows you as an owner of an undivided 1/2 interest." I asked, "And anyone checking the title would see that?" She said, "They should." Should. Such a small word for such a large fraud. I said, "I need certified copies." "Two," she asked. "Of this deed?" I said, "Yes." She stamped them at the side counter, the raised seal pressed into the paper with a soft crunch. I paid with my debit card, signed the receipt, and held those copies like they were warm. Before I left, Mrs. Hanley said, "There is also a recent document request from a title company. Mallory Title." My fingers tightened on the folder. I asked, "Can you print that?" She said, "I can print the public index entry and any recorded instruments. The title company request itself is internal to them, but there is an affidavit filed with the preliminary sale packet." I asked, "Whose affidavit?" She turned back to the computer and said, "Wade Mercer." The name came out of her mouth flat, just data, but my body heard it like a door slamming. She printed it. The affidavit was 2 pages. Wade had signed beneath a paragraph stating that he was the authorized representative for the estate, and that, to his knowledge, no other person held ownership interest that would prevent transfer of the property. To his knowledge. My brother had always loved phrases that gave him a crack to crawl through. But the deed had been recorded for 3 years. He had been in Mama's house. He had taken the blue folder. He had told Pamela enough for her to say, "Caregiving does not make you an owner." He knew. I asked Mrs. Hanley for one certified copy of the affidavit, too. She looked at me over her purple glasses and said, "You may want to speak to an attorney." I said, "I will." But first, I wanted to know exactly how far Wade had already walked into the lie. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the folder on the passenger seat. The county seal caught sunlight through the windshield. I touched it with the pad of my thumb. There was something almost cruel about how calm the paper was. No raised voice, no shaking finger, no memory to argue with. Just my mother's name, my name, and the truth Wade had tried to sell around. I called Mallory Title from the parking lot. A young receptionist answered. "Mallory Title Services. This is Jenna." I said, "My name is Eileen Mercer. I am calling about 114 Sycamore Road." She said, "Let me pull that up." I heard typing, then a pause. She said, "Yes, ma'am. Closing is scheduled for Friday at 10. Friday. It was Wednesday. I asked, "Are all owners required to attend closing?" She said, "Yes, Mom. Unless there is a properly executed power of attorney or authorization." I asked, "Do you have one for me?" There was more typing, then a longer pause. She asked, "May I place you on a brief hold?" I said, "No," not sharply, but firmly enough that she stopped breathing into the receiver for half a beat. "Please check while I am here." The typing resumed. She said, I do not see you listed as a seller. I said, that is the problem. She said nothing. I said, I have a certified deed from the county showing I own 1/2 interest in the property. Another pause. Then her voice changed. Less receptionist, more alarmed employee. She said, I am going to transfer you to Miss Mallory. The owner of the title company came on the line 2 minutes later. Her voice was older, dry, and professionally cautious. She said, Miss Mercer, I understand there may be an ownership question. I said, there is no question. There is a recorded deed. I have certified copies in my hand. She said, I see. I asked, do you have a seller's statement from Wade Mercer saying no other owner has interest? She said, we have documents submitted by the seller representative. I said, that representative is my brother. He does not own my half. Miss Mallory was quiet, long enough for me to hear a door close on her end. She asked, would you be willing to bring the certified deed to our office before closing? I said, yes. She said, we need to review the file. I said, I will bring it Friday morning. She said, Miss Mercer, earlier would be better. I said, I understand. I looked at the affidavit on my passenger seat, Wade's signature bold at the bottom. Then I said, but I will bring it Friday morning. She understood more than she said. Women our age often do. She said slowly, all right. Please arrive at 9:30. I said, no. I will arrive at 10. I was not going to let Wade fix this in private. For once, he was going to meet the consequences in the room he had chosen. I did call an attorney that afternoon, not one from television, a real estate attorney named Carla Voss, whose office was above a dentist and smelled faintly of peppermint because the air vents were shared. She looked at the deed, the affidavit, and the listing printout I had taken from the realtor's website. Then she said, this sale cannot close properly without you. I asked, could they still try? She said, people try all kinds of things. I asked, can I stop it? She said, you already have the document that stops it. The title company should not proceed once they see this. I looked down at my hands. I had trimmed my nails the night before Mama's funeral because Pamela had made a comment once about caregivers letting themselves go. I hated that I remembered it. I asked, what happens to Wade? Carla leaned back. That depends on how the title company, buyers, and estate process respond. At minimum, the closing stops. Escrow may be frozen while they sort it out. His credibility as representative is damaged. She continued, if he filed a false affidavit knowingly, that can create bigger problems. I said, he will say it was a misunderstanding. Carla said, then let him say it in front of. The document. That was the first time I smiled. Not because any of this was funny, but because somebody finally understood the shape of the thing. Denise came over that night with a rotisserie chicken, potato salad, and the face of a woman ready to hear ugliness. I spread the papers on my dining room table. She put on her grocery store reading glasses and read every line. Denise said, your mama knew. I said, she tried to tell me. Denise said, she did more than tell you. She recorded it. I nodded. Denise tapped the deed and said, Wade hated that. I said, I do not know when he found out. Denise looked at me like I had said something foolish. She said, yes, you do. I did. Wade had found out when he took the blue folder from the china cabinet. Maybe before. Maybe. Mama told him, and he pretended not to hear. Maybe Pamela saw it while helping organize papers after hospice. It did not matter. The deed had not hidden itself. It had been recorded in a public office for 3 years. Denise pushed the affidavit closer. She said, "This is the part that gets him. Not being greedy. Not being bossy. This, his signature. His clean, confident signature beneath a lie." My phone buzzed. Family group chat again. Pamela had written, "Closing is Friday. Praying everyone can respect Margaret's wishes and allow this chapter to close." I stared at the words. Respect Margaret's wishes. My mother's name looked stolen in Pamela's sentence. I wanted to answer with the deed. I wanted to photograph the raised seal and send it to every cousin, aunt, neighbor, and church friend who had let Wade's version settle over me like dust. I wanted to type, "Here are Margaret's wishes, Pamela. Read slowly." Denise watched my face and said, "Do not." I said, "I know." She said, "No, I mean, really do not. People like Pamela need time to rehearse. Do not give her any." I set the phone down. Denise reached across the table and covered my hand. She said, "You were trained to explain yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you." I looked at her. She said, "That ends Friday." The next day, Wade came to Mama's house while I was there boxing up her cookbooks. He did not knock. He used his key and walked in with Pamela behind him carrying a roll of blue painter's tape. They stopped when they saw me at the kitchen table. Wade's eyes went first to the boxes, then to my purse, then to the china cabinet drawer hanging open. He asked, "What are you doing here?" I asked, "What does it look like?" He said, "We agreed Pamela would handle sorting." I said, "No." "You decided that?" Pamela put the painter's tape on the counter with a little click. She said, "We are trying to keep this orderly." I asked, "By removing documents?" Her mouth tightened. Wade stepped forward and said, "I do not know what story you have built in your head, but this house has to sell. Mom's estate has bills. We cannot have you clinging to every doily because you do not know how to let go." I placed Mama's church cookbook into the box. The cover was stained with vanilla and thumbprints. I said, "I am not clinging to doilies." He said, "You are making everyone uncomfortable." That was Wade's favorite weapon, not truth, comfort. He made theft sound like tension. He made questions sound like hysteria. He made resistance sound like bad manners. I said, "Everyone survived being uncomfortable when I was the one bathing Mama." Pamela's eyes flicked toward Wade. She did not like plain sentences. They left no place to hang perfume. Wade lowered his voice. "You need to think carefully about how you behave tomorrow." I asked, "Tomorrow?" He said, "At closing." So he did know I was coming. He said, "Pamela and I spoke to Miss Mallory. She said there might be some confusion, but I am sure we can clear it up. Privately." There it was, privately, the holy word of guilty families. I said, "I will be there at 10. He leaned, both hands on the table, and said, "You are not going to embarrass me in front of buyers." I looked at his hands. He wore Daddy's watch. He had taken it after the funeral, saying Mama would have wanted him to have it. The leather band was too dark and too new. He had replaced the worn one Daddy wore for 20 years. I said, "You embarrassed yourself when you signed the affidavit." For the first time, his face changed. Only a flicker, but I saw it. Pamela saw it too. She asked too quickly, "What affidavit?" Wade straightened and said, "This is exactly the kind of thing I am talking about. Half information. Accusations. You do not understand how these processes work." I said, "No, but I understand my name." He stared at me. I did not say deed. I did not say certified copy. I did not say county clerk. I put another cookbook in the box and closed the flaps. Pamela picked up the painter's tape, then put it back down. She said, "We should go." Wade kept looking at me like he wanted to find the old version of his sister, the one who would soften if he frowned long enough. She was not in that kitchen anymore. After they left, I checked every window lock. Not because I thought they would break in, but because I needed my hands doing something ordinary before anger got reckless. Friday morning, I dressed carefully. Not fancy, not funeral, not church. Gray slacks, white blouse, navy cardigan, low black shoes polished at the toes. I put Mama's silver pen in my purse. Then I put the certified deed, the affidavit, the listing printout, and the tax receipts in a blue folder. The certified deed went in the front pocket by itself. Not hidden. Protected. Denise picked me up at 9:30 in her white Subaru. She had already been to the hairdresser that week and smelled faintly of hairspray and spearmint gum. She asked, "You ready?" I said, "No." She said, "Good. Ready people sometimes talk too much." I almost laughed. Mallory Title Services occupied the first floor of a tan office building near the bank. There were 3 ceramic planters by the door, each holding a struggling fern. I remember that, because grief and rage both make the mind cling to useless details. Ferns, beige carpet, a receptionist with a gold necklace shaped like a J, and a coffee machine burbling near the copier. Jenna looked up when we entered. She recognized my name before I gave it. She asked, "Miss Mercer?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Miss Mallory is in the conference room." I asked, "Are the others here?" She glanced down the hall and said, "Yes, ma'am." Good. Denise touched my elbow once. The conference room door was open. Wade sat at the far end of the table like he had reserved authority with his chair. Pamela sat to his right, purse on the table, sunglasses folded beside it. Lips painted a soft pink meant to look gentle. The buyers sat across from them, a young couple maybe in their early 30s. The woman had a folder full of inspection notes. The man held a pen and looked excited in the nervous way people do when they think they are. About to buy their first home. Their realtor, a silver-haired woman in a green blazer, stood near the wall. Miss Mallory sat near the head of the table with a stack of documents squared in front of her. Wade looked at me, then at Denise. He said, "I did not know this was a family reunion." Denise pulled out a chair and said, "It is not." Pamela smiled at the buyers. "My sister-in-law is having some difficulty with the transition. It has been emotional." The young woman buyer gave me a sympathetic look. That almost hurt worse than hostility. She thought she was witnessing grief. She was witnessing fraud, with a flowered purse. Miss Mallory cleared her throat. "Miss Mercer, thank you for coming." Wade leaned back. "Before we begin, I want to say that I hope we can keep this dignified. Our mother would hate all this conflict." I sat down across from him and placed the blue folder on the table. I said, "Mama hated lies more." Pamela's smile stayed up, but the skin around her eyes tightened. Miss Mallory looked at me and said, "You indicated you have documentation." I said, "I do." Wade lifted one hand and said, "And I have explained, there is confusion, because Mom talked about many things near the end. Eileen was under tremendous stress." He continued, "We all appreciate what she did, but appreciation is not ownership." The buyers shifted. The realtor stopped leaning against the wall. I looked at Wade. For years, he had counted on me answering every insult. He had counted on me defending my feelings, my sacrifices, and my tone. He wanted me to talk about caregiving so he could make the room about emotion. I did not give him that room. I opened the folder. The paper made a soft scrape as I slid the certified deed across the table, not to Wade, but to Miss Mallory. I said, "This is the recorded deed from the county property records. It shows that Margaret Mercer transferred 1/2 interest in 114 Sycamore Road to me. 3 years ago. It is certified." Miss Mallory placed one hand on the corner of the document and leaned down to read. Her eyes moved across the page. Recording date, book number, page number, grantor, grantee. Wade's pen stopped tapping. Pamela reached toward the paper. Miss Mallory did not move her hand, but Pamela withdrew hers. The air conditioner hummed above us. A coffee cup near the buyer's elbow gave off a thin line of steam. Somewhere outside the room, the copier started and stopped. Miss Mallory picked up Wade's seller affidavit from her stack. She said, "Mr. Mercer, your submitted statement says no other person holds ownership interest that would prevent transfer." Wade's face did not collapse. Men like Wade do not collapse at first, they rearrange. He gave a small, controlled laugh and said, "That is not what that means." The realtor in the green blazer stepped closer to the table and asked, "What does it mean?" Wade said, "It means that I am authorized to settle the estate." Miss Mallory looked at the deed again and said, "The estate does not include Miss Mercer's 1/2 interest." Pamela's lips parted. The young buyer put her pen down. Wade's voice grew thinner as he said, "Mom was not well when she signed some things." Denise leaned forward and said, "Careful." Wade looked at her and said, "You do not know the whole story." Denise said, "I was at the kitchen table when Margaret said she wanted Eileen protected. I drove her to record it." Pamela turned toward Wade. "You told me that paper was just about roof reimbursement." There it was. Not the whole truth, but enough of a crack for light to get through. Wade's hand tightened around his pen until his knuckles paled. He said, "It was a misunderstanding." I looked at him and spoke the line I had carried all morning. "You did not forget my inheritance, Wade. You sold around it. No one moved for a few seconds. Not frozen like a movie. Real people do smaller things." The buyer's wife closed her folder halfway, then opened it again because her hands needed somewhere to go. The realtor pressed her lips together and looked at Miss Mallory instead of Wade. Pamela's sunglasses slid an inch across the polished table when her purse shifted. Wade stared at the deed like it had insulted him personally. Miss Mallory stacked the documents with careful hands and said, "This closing cannot proceed today." The young man buyer blinked. "Are we losing the house?" Miss Mallory said, "I cannot advise you legally, but title cannot transfer cleanly under the current seller documents." The realtor turned to Wade. "Did you know your sister was on the deed?" Wade opened his mouth. No answer came out fast enough. That delay did what my anger never could have done. Pamela saw it, the buyer saw it, the realtor saw it. Miss Mallory already knew. Wade finally said, "I believed the estate paperwork superseded." Miss Mallory said, "No." One word, Flat. Professional. Deadly. He flushed. Pamela pushed back from the table. The chair leg scratched against the carpet strip at the edge of the room. She said, "Wade," not lovingly. He turned toward her and said, "Pamela, not now." She gave a small laugh, sharp enough to cut thread. "Not now? You told me she was trying to shake us down." The young woman buyer looked at me differently then. The sympathy was gone, not replaced by pity, but by something steadier. She said quietly, "I am sorry." I said, "You did not do this." Wade looked annoyed that I had spoken kindly to the buyers. It made him smaller somehow, his anger having no proper place to land. Ms. Mallory stood. "I am going to place the file under review. Earnest money will remain in escrow until the parties receive guidance regarding the failed. Closing conditions." The young man rubbed one hand over his jaw. "We gave notice on our apartment." His wife touched his wrist. That sentence hit the room hard because it showed the size of Wade's lie. He had not only gambled with my inheritance, he had gambled with two strangers' housing, the realtor's time, the title company's file, and Mama's name. Pamela stood fully now. "I need air," Wade snapped. "Sit down." She looked at him then with a face I had never seen from her, not soft, not polished, not performing. She said, "No." Then she picked up her purse, leaving the sunglasses behind, and walked out. That was the first thing he lost. Control. Not of the house, not yet, but of the room. People stopped arranging themselves around his comfort. The realtor asked Miss Mallory for copies of the document references. The buyers asked about their escrow. Denise sat back with her arms folded, watching Wade like she had finally seen a dog bite the hand that had been feeding it scraps. Wade tried to recover by turning to me. He said, "We can still handle this between us." I almost admired the nerve. I said, "No. We handled things between us when you said you would help with the roof and did not." I continued, "We handled things between us when you took documents from Mama's house. We handled things between us when you told the family I was greedy. This part is in writing." His face darkened. "You are enjoying this," I said. "No, I am ending it." Miss Mallory made copies of my certified deed. She did not keep the original. When she handed it back to me, the raised seal pressed against my thumb again, a small, hard circle under the skin. Wade watched that handoff. He understood then, maybe more than anyone, that power had changed shape. It was no longer his voice against mine. It was his signature against the deed. By noon, the family group chat had gone from sermon to courtroom. Pamela must have called someone from the parking lot because Marla wrote, "Wade, is Eileen actually on the deed?" No answer. Aunt Ruth wrote, "Wade?" No answer. Then Denise wrote one sentence, "She is." I witnessed Margaret's decision. That did not fix years of being doubted. Nothing fixes that cleanly, but it pulled the cover off the lie. By 3 o'clock, the realtor had removed the sale pending rider. I know, because I drove past the house and saw only the main for sale sign standing there, suddenly embarrassed by itself. By Monday, the listing disappeared online. By Wednesday, Carla Voss filed a formal notice with the estate attorney Wade had been trying to use without me. The notice included the certified deed, the affidavit, and a demand that no sale, listing, disposal of household property, or estate action involving 114 Sycamore Road proceed without written consent from both legal interests. That was the second thing Wade lost. Support. Not everybody apologized. People who helped shame you rarely line up to confess. They go quiet and hope silence counts as maturity. But Pamela stopped posting about honoring Mama. Aunt Ruth called me and cried, not because she had defended Wade, but because she had not known what to think. Marla sent a message that said, "I am sorry if I added to your stress," which was not a full apology, but was more than I expected. The real change came from Pamela. She called me 6 days after the closing failed. I almost did not answer. She said, "Eileen, did Wade take a blue folder from the china cabinet?" I said, "Yes." A long breath. Then she said, "I saw it in his office. He told me it was old paperwork that did not matter." I said, "He lied to both of us." She said, "I do not like being included in that sentence." I said, "Then do not stand where it fits." She said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, "Fair." I did not forgive her. I did not invite her over. I did not soothe her embarrassment, because women like Pamela are used to turning shame into something another woman has to carry. But she did one useful thing. She sent Carla a photograph of the blue folder sitting in Wade's home office, with Mama's handwriting visible on the tab. House transfer. Eileen. That was not the main proof. The deed was. But it proved Wade had touched the truth before he signed the lie. 2 weeks later, Wade was removed from handling estate communications after Carla pushed the issue with the probate attorney. He was not dragged away. There were no sirens. Real consequences often arrive in envelopes, not handcuffs. The attorney sent a letter stating that, due to disputed representations and conflict between interested parties, Wade would no longer serve as the sole family contact regarding the property or estate assets. Any future sale of the house would require my written consent, independent review, and clean title documentation. That was the third thing he lost. The exact thing he wanted. The ability to sell Mama's house without me. The buyers got their earnest money released. I heard later they found another house across town with a fenced backyard and no family war attached to it. I was glad. They had been innocent people caught in Wade's hurry. Wade did not call me for almost a month. When he finally did, his voice had lost its boardroom polish. He said, "You humiliated me." I was sitting on Mama's back steps, pulling dead leaves out of a planter. The late afternoon sun had warmed the concrete. A cardinal hopped along the fence, bossy and bright. I said, "No. The deed corrected you." He said, "You could have come to me first." I said, "I did. In the yard, on the phone, in Mama's kitchen. You called me greedy." He said, "You were making accusations." I said, "I was asking why strangers were measuring windows in a house I partly owned." He breathed hard into the phone. "You always have to make yourself the martyr." That old hook dropped into the water between us. For years, I would have bitten. I would have explained that I was not a martyr. I would have listed appointments and bills and nights and wounds, trying to make him understand a life he had benefited from not seeing. This time, I watched the cardinal fly into the lilacs. I said, "I am not the martyr. I am the owner." Then I hung up. The house stayed off the market through the summer. I did not move in right away. I did not know if I wanted to. The rooms still had too much of Mama in them, and not the easy parts. Her pill bottles were gone, but I could still hear the rattle. The recliner was empty, but my body still turned toward it when I entered the living room. I spent Saturdays there sorting slowly, not Pamela's way, with painter's tape and a donation schedule. My way. I kept the church cookbook with vanilla stains. I kept Daddy's old level from the garage because Wade had missed it when he took the obvious tools. I kept Mama's blue cardigan, even though one elbow was thin enough to see light through. I threw away 3 bags of expired medicine, 2 boxes of cracked plastic containers, and every real estate brochure I found. The for sale sign came out in August. I did it myself. The wooden stake had been driven deep, and the ground was dry. I worked it back and forth until my palms hurt. When it finally gave, dirt clung to the pointed end, like the yard was reluctant to let go of the insult. I carried it to the garage and leaned it against the wall. Then I changed the locks. The locksmith was a woman named Tasha with gray braids tucked under a baseball cap. She asked how many keys I wanted. I said 2. She asked, just 2? I said, 1 for me, 1 for Denise. She grinned, like she understood without needing the story. When she handed me the new brass key, it felt lighter than Mama's old red-capped one. Less history in it. More boundary. I put the certified deed in a fireproof box, but before I locked it away, I took it to Mama's kitchen table one last time. The table had been scrubbed so many times, the finish was worn, dull in the center. I set the deed there, beside Mama's silver pen. For a while, I just sat. I thought about all the times I had mistaken being useful for being loved. I thought about all the times I had let Wade speak first, because arguing with confidence is exhausting. I thought about all the times I had protected Mama from knowing how little her son helped, then protected Wade from being judged for it after she died. That was the part I had to own. Wade had lied. Pamela had helped. But I had been trained to keep the peace so long that peace started looking exactly like my own disappearance. Not anymore. The house on Sycamore Road may be sold one day. Maybe I will decide the memories are too heavy. Maybe I will rent it to a young family who likes lilacs. Maybe I will live there when the stairs in my own townhouse get harder on my knees. The difference is simple. It will happen with my signature. Not around me, not above me, and not behind my back while someone calls me greedy for noticing. A month after the failed closing, I ran into Wade at the grocery store. He was standing near the deli counter, holding a number ticket, looking older than I remembered. Pamela was not with him. He saw me and looked away first. That small movement told me more than any apology would have. I walked past him with coffee, oranges, and a pack of Mama's favorite lemon cookies in my cart. My hand was wrapped around the new house key on my keyring, not because I was afraid, but because I liked feeling it there. Proof is not always loud. Sometimes it is a county seal raised under your thumb. Sometimes it is a lock changed on a yellow house. Sometimes it is a brother looking away in the grocery store because, for once, the story he told did not survive the paper that told the truth. They called me greedy for asking about my inheritance. Then the deed exposed their sale. And I learned something I wish I had learned 30 years earlier. When people profit from your silence, they will call your proof cruelty. Bring the proof anyway. Would you have warned Wade before the closing? Or would you have let him meet the deed in front of everyone?